Hey, I'm Randy, and you're watching The Cheap Audio Man. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We have a whole bunch of videos about speakers, amps, DACs, turntables, a whole bunch of stuff. We concentrate on high-value audio and home theater equipment. So hit the bell notification if you're so inclined. Like the video, because today we're talking about the mighty CSS Audio Criton 1TDX. So grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and let's talk about the mighty Critons. Today's sponsor is Chicken Falcon Hawk's radioisotopes, cesium and rubidium. I would open this up, but then I would melt my face off with beta, alpha, gamma radiation. Cesium and rubidium from Chicken Falcon Hawk. You can use them to calibrate all of your radiacs. And don't open the box though, because you could really hurt yourself. Bonus, it decays into barium and strontium. So it's like getting 4 radioisotopes for the price of 2 Chicken Falcon Hawk radioisotopes. They're $33,000 for the pair. CSS Audio, what are they? They make speaker kits, and it includes subwoofer kits and speaker kits, bookshelves, center channel speakers, a variety of speakers. This one is called the Criton 1TDX. There's 2 kinds of Critons. There's a 1TD and a 1TDX, both of which you can choose from 2 different crossovers. So in essence, there's 4 different options for the Criton. The 1TDX comes with a upgraded tweeter from the original 1TD version. And again, there's 2 crossovers for both. 1TD is the less expensive speaker. 1TDX, more expensive, better tweeter. Not saying the tweeter in the 1TD isn't great. Better tweeter, different crossover, but then you can get a base crossover and an upgraded crossover. And today, these are the 1TDXs, and they have the upgraded crossover installed. I actually put these together. This is ebony. Ebony is the type of veneer that is installed on these speakers, and it's engineered veneer. CSS sent the speakers to me and the veneer, but I liked them so much that I bought another woofer and some other stuff so that I could have two speakers, the 1TD and the 1TDX. The woofer is paper fiberglass, and I have another one over here. Very nice woofer as far as woofers go. Very heavy. It's got a whole bunch of cool cast aluminum stuff with a vent and on the bottom. Let's see, what else does it have? It's got a vented voice coil, a big old vent on the back, flared vent. So they put a lot of time and effort into, put a lot of time and effort into designing this, and you can tell when you're listening to it. It's got a very nice 1-inch soft dome tweeter as well, with a little bit of a flare, waveguide type of a deal here. Here's the deal. The tweeter is $165 a piece. The woofer, I think, around $150 a piece. These are expensive drivers, and there's a reason why they're expensive, because they're built very well. Specifications. Anechoic. Anechoic means the speakers are put into basically a soundproof room where there's no reflections, nothing going on, it's just the speaker. And these are rated down to 40 hertz, -3 dB in an anechoic chamber, which is extremely low. Frankly, it's the lowest rating I've ever seen for an anechoic rating on a bookshelf speaker. In room, they are reported in-room response is going to be lower than anechoic because you have room gain and things like that, which basically means there's stuff coming off the back wall and the side walls. Anyway, 30, that's lower than a lot of towers go, which have a lot more space. Now, these are pretty big enclosures, but it's still a bookshelf speaker. So they're rated anechoic from 40 up to 20K. Even with the different tweeters, the frequency response ratings remain the same, 40 up to 20 kilohertz. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that one of the owners, Carrie Ames, has a little bit in common with me. We both served in the Navy, we both served on nuclear submarines, and we both worked in the engine room. Well, he was an officer, I wasn't. Anyway, I know the school that he went through because I went through the same school. A little bit different, but it's the same school, and it's very difficult. So if he can make it through that school and he can be a submarine officer on a nuclear submarine, chances are he's probably got a pretty good chance at designing a decent speaker. And guess what? He did. So I've built I've built 4 or 5 pairs of these because I built a couple for customers. So I know what the enclosure looks like. They have a very clever way of doing the enclosure. It only goes together one way, and it makes it easier for clamping and things like that. But the design characteristic of the enclosure is fantastic. There is a huge brace inside, and it makes it, I'm not saying this is easy, but it makes it easier for a first-time builder to get the enclosure together, right? Because it only goes together one time. Now, of course, you're gonna have to clamp it and things like that, but the way that they design the enclosure is awesome. The drivers that they use in here are awesome. Sorry, drivers, that's plural, are. So, oftentimes I get asked about comparing kit speakers to factory speakers, and that's just an apples to oranges comparison, because couple things. One, you can't really put a value on what the labor is if you're doing it. Let's say it takes 5 days. Now you can get these together. You can do the crossover in a day and then glue up the enclosures. That's maybe another day. You have to wait for them to dry. Assembling it doesn't really take that long. The thing that takes the longest with putting a speaker together is if you want it to look good. And that can be quite frustrating with veneer and gluing it and routing it and doing all sorts of stuff. And if you're doing this over the time span of a week or 2, then it's really not that big of a deal. But one has to consider, how much is my labor? How much is my time? What is that worth? So this kit, the base kit, starts at $750, I think, and then you have to add on a closure, which is another $150, and then if you want the upgraded crossover, that's another $350. So you're into this just for materials over $1,000. And then if you put all of your time, effort, that number goes even higher. So comparing this to a factory speaker that costs an equivalent price isn't really a fair comparison, because all in, this is probably more like a $2,000 speaker or a $2,500 speaker. So comparing it to an equivalently priced speaker when it just comes to materials. So if this is $1,100, comparing it to, a ELAC that's $1,100, it's not really fair. Not to mention that normally those factory speakers go through a traditional distribution method, so there's going to be margin in there for dealers and distributors and things like that. So keep that in mind. You can't really compare a $1,000 kit to a $1,000 speaker. Not saying a $1,000 manufactured speaker can't sound awesome. They often do. But for my purposes, I try to keep the kit and the factory speakers separated. The base crossover comes with Dayton audio parts, inductors, and an iron core inductor on the base circuit. Now the upgraded are, I think they come from Dayton Audio too, but they're giant Jensen capacitors, a big air core inductor, and it's quite impressive. Also, for the crossovers, you get a 3D printed board. I'd show it to you, but it's inside the speaker. 3D printed board. So it tells one where to put each capacitor, where to put each value of the capacitor. Just pop it in there, and then on the back you solder it together. It also gives you letters on the back. So if you have 2 A's, that means those A's get soldered together. If you have 3 G's for ground, that means those get soldered together. So it takes a bit of intimidation out of building the crossover. I've got some pictures, but the upgraded crossover takes up the entirety of the bottom of the speaker. It is huge and quite a bit bigger than the stock crossover. Now, do upgraded parts make a difference? I know some people would say yes, some people would say no. Ultimately, that's up to you. This one has the upgraded crossover, and so that's what I'm going to talk about as far as how this one sounds. Soundstage and imaging. Just out of the box, this speaker can disappear very easily. If you pull it out into the room, you get the placement correct, and it's not difficult to get the placement correct on these speakers. This is not the biggest waveguide I've ever seen, but the dispersion is very good, so it lends itself to off-axis performance. Off-axis performance is either horizontal or vertical. So it depends on, so let's just example. The vertical off-axis of a speaker isn't very good. So what happens when you raise your head is the sound changes quite a bit. When you have a nice or good vertical off-axis, like you do with the Criton 1 TDX, it means when you stand up, get 3, 4, 5, 6 inches, there's not really a big, huge change in the sound signature. Yes, it will change, but it's more gradual change than some other speakers that don't have a good vertical off-axis. With all this said, the center imaging is great. Lateral imaging and soundstage width is great. Vertical imaging and vertical soundstage is great. If you get these 3 foot out, you're going to hear a soundstage that is deep and wide and broad. Okay? They're good. They soundstage great. Any of the MTV Unplugged records sounded fantastic. Locked on center image. Kurt Cobain was right in front of me. Jonathan Davis was right in front of me. Alanis Morissette was right in front of me, and incidentally, I went to a concert and she was right in front of me, so it was pretty cool. It's great. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. I'm not saying it's the best. I think maybe the ELAC Unify series with the huge concentric drivers, maybe throw a bigger soundstage, but I mean, you're splitting hairs here, really. So these are one. GR Research Encores also throw a very nice soundstage, but I don't think you're going to be upset if you get these in regards to soundstage and imaging. Let's talk about bass. Bass, oh bass. On the mighty Criton 1 TDX upgraded version. This is really where this speaker just separates itself from any factory. And I know I'm going to say that you can't really compare it. This separates itself from any speaker that I've ever heard. And I'll say this. This speaker is so good that I can't really have it in the house anymore. So when I'm done with this review, I'm not getting rid of it forever, but it's going to go live in one of my patrons' houses for a while, because I just can't have it here. It's that much better than any of the other speakers I have here. Getting back to the bass. Anechoic of 40 goes down to 30 in room. I know this, I know it does, because if you listen to Narcissistic Cannibal by Korn, at the 1 minute mark, there is a very low bass hit. And it goes way down. To the point where on a lot of headphones and a lot of speakers, and if you don't have a subwoofer, you're not even aware that it exists. But the reason I know it exists is because I have a subwoofer in my car. I know, go figure. And when it hits really low. There's only been 2 speakers that have ever been able to handle that song without a subwoofer. And this is one of them. Criton 1 TDs is the other one. So I guess there's 3. And then the Q Acoustics 3030i. Give you an impression of it. But these handle that song better than any other speaker. You don't even know that that note is there on other speakers. Bass, tone, texture, and clarity. Sublime. It is, again, the best I have ever heard. So What, Miles Davis, the stand-up bass, The God That Failed, Metallica, do-do-do-do-do. The amount of clarity and tactility of the bass, how real, how big it sounded, was incredible. As far as electronics, I've had these connected to a lot of things, and they play well with everything. I like AB. They're 8 ohm, 87 dB efficiency, so they're not terribly hard to drive. I drove these off of a tube amp, but with all this bass, with the ability for this woofer to move, I'd recommend getting a bit of power on here. 50 watts or more, you're probably going to get the best out of it. But even with low powered stuff, I was able to get a great sound out of it. But I settled in on the Emotiva A2, which I think 100 watts into 8, and the Schmidt Vidar, which is about 100 watts. Listen to this on a variety of DACs, including the Denafreps Aries 2, the Topping EX5, the Schmidt Modi 3, pretty much any DAC. This plays well with everything. It doesn't have any type of odd frequency bumps here and there that would make it unpleasant to listen to depending upon different electronics. It's pretty transparent to the source, but it's just a big sound. I've never heard space before. Usually when I hear space and how big a room is when I'm listening to a recording, it has everything to do with the treble. But I was listening, and I wasn't critically listening, I was doing something else, and it was Alice in Chains, MTV. And I can't remember which track it was, but I just recall hearing the size of the room, and it was actually in the bass region instead of in the treble region. Never heard that before. So these speakers give a huge sense of space, and it's actually happening in the lower end. So quite amazing. The bass on here is absolutely flawless, really. There is one kind of can get you, and that is if you are in a small room. If you're in a small room and you have these closer to a wall, the mid bass can be a bit much, and it can cover up some details in the mid range and the top end. But that's not really a problem with the speaker, it's a problem with the room. There's so much bass being loaded up in the room from these that in a smaller room, it can get a bit much. But if you get them away from the wall, I wouldn't consider this a desktop speaker. Just bear in mind that this thing is powerful. It just handles everything effortlessly. It's quite impressive. Let's talk about mid-range. Mid-range. The crossover is set at 1600 hertz, so that means a lot of the mid-range is going on in the woofer. And again, it's fantastic. The level of clarity here is really unrivaled at anything else. And I haven't heard other kits that are $1,000, so I couldn't really compare them. The other kit that I have, or had, but again, I had to get that one out of the house too, is the GR Research Encore. These two speakers have a different sound signature, where the Critons are more full, but not rolled off at all, and the Encores are a little bit more airy, and they don't have nearly the bass extension or bass presence as the Critons. So they're just different. They're different flavors. Mid-range on here is flat and clear. Male vocals especially benefit from the added bass. But when I say added bass, I'm not talking about bumps in the frequency response. I'm just saying there's so much bass presence that male vocals sound especially full. But female vocals also sound especially awesome too, because this is a fantastic tweeter. So when stuff is in the upper registers of the mid-range, that tweeter takes over and it's fantastic. And we'll get into treble later, but the tweeter, pretty much flawless. It doesn't have as huge of a waveguide as some other speakers have. Again though, it is the best way to describe this speaker is it's just effortless. It doesn't feel like it's struggling to reproduce any note. Shoot to Thrill by AC/DC. You know, you want it to be crunchy, coming out of the right speaker, crunchy, and then that is recorded a little bit stepped back. So you can hear the room, and then the guitar comes in, and it should growl and be gravelly, but yet have body. And if your tweeter's handling too much of that part, then it's going to sound real metallic-y, which is good. But if the woofer's handling too much, it's going to sound veiled. If it's done just right, it's going to sound very detailed, crunchy, but also have a sense of body and heft. And that's what happened on the Critons. Vocals, acoustic guitars, anything, Redemption Song, Bob Marley, ton of detail, but again, a lot of body and thickness and fullness. Lends itself to a very realistic reproduction of the music. This is not going to, and I'm not saying speakers that color the sound are bad. I really love that. A lot of times on AMT tweeters, it can sound too detailed, but it's still a very pleasant sounding speaker. With the soft dome, with the 7-inch paper woofer, fiberglass woofer here, you're getting a very realistic reproduction of the sound. Let's talk about treble. Treble, on these speakers, the 1TD and the 1TDX both have a similar top end frequency rating at 20,000 hertz. But I will say, having lived with both speakers, the 1TDX sounds like it has more treble, even if it doesn't reflect that in the frequency response. The details are fantastic without being screeching or grating or in your face at all. Again, flawless, effortlessly reproducing the top end of any music. Cymbals, incredible. Africa, Weezer, the cover of Toto, the cymbals just hang in the air. The level of decay is fantastic. If you're in a larger room and you're not building up a lot of mid bass to cover that up, just hangs. Chocolate chip trip, the gong at the beginning, it sounds like bells. Just again, hangs in the air. And this tweeter, while it's a soft dome, rivals the level of clarity as aluminum domes, titaniums, and even AMTs. The percussion at the beginning of Higher Love by Steve Winwood, a lot of rim hits, a lot of rim shots, a lot of percussion going on that's very snappy. And if you have good treble, it's going to give you a very realistic sound and very tactile, very almost jolting when they hit the snare drum and the rim at the same time. Rim shot. Anyway, it just sounds great. It's fantastic. It's realistic, and it's so effortless. And again, effortless. That's what the speaker is. It just reproduces everything effortlessly, and it's very dynamic. So changes from loud to soft. It's amazing. 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 Nina Simone, Centerman, the hi-hat at the beginning. It's just flawless. Flawless. All right, what are my final thoughts? Final thoughts on the Criton 1TDX with the upgraded crossover. I couldn't be happier. This speaker's so good, I have to get it out of my house. That should say something. I can't have it in my house, even for like my own listening. I've got to get it out because it's just not a fair fight. The difference between the 1TD and the 1TDX is subtle, but it's not subtle. I think even to a layman, they're going to be able to hear a difference in the treble response. And if you can swing it, I think the 1TDX is going to be, in the long term, a speaker that is more attractive to most people. What I'm saying is if you get the 1TDX, I don't think you're ever going to be like, really want to upgrade. But the great thing about getting the 1TD is you can get it for a lower cost right now. And then if you ever get curious or you want to upgrade, you can buy the upgraded tweeter and the upgraded crossover. Differences between the base crossover and the upgraded crossover, subtle but there. I did hear a difference, and I didn't have both of them to AB them, so I'm going off of memory. And the 1TDX with the bass crossover was fantastic. The 1TDX with the upgraded crossover was just kind of awe-inspiring. I was just like, wow, okay. Whether or not my memory is serving me properly here, and that's an accurate statement, I don't know. What I do know is this is one of the best sounding speakers I've ever heard, if not the best sounding speaker I've ever heard, depending upon what flavor you like. Building these is not easy, but again, not impossible. I've put together 5 or 6 of them at this point. The crossover board makes it somewhat easier. You're going to have to do a few jumpers from here and there, but it makes it so you can just plug them in. Now they'll also give you a one-line diagram if you want to do it the more traditional way, but the way that they designed this kit is fantastic. The enclosures only go together one way, 3D printed crossover board, very good parts. You can get upgraded parts for it. It's pretty hard to pick out any flaws. The only thing that I would ever be concerned about with this speaker is it's kind of one of the greatest things about it, and it's the bass. In a small room close to a wall, there may be some boominess. There may be some mid bass covering up some mid clarity, but get these in a room. This can go toe to toe and pick fights with any tower, and it's going to be way more refined than most towers, even at probably twice the cost. But again, you have to take into consideration what your time is worth. How long is it going to take you to get a finish on these that you love? Comparing these to equivalently priced factory speakers isn't really fair, because you probably have two grand and worth of time, effort, and everything when you're done with this. But if you're so inclined and you have the skill set, one can get an incredible sound out of this kit. Highly recommended if you have the time and the money. If you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon, patreon.com/cheapaudioman. Every Sunday night we have Patreon-only Zooms. We also have a Patreon-only Facebook group. You can also sign up for Amazon Music. I have all of my playlists linked in the description, including the Cheap Audio Man test tracks, Leg Warmers, and the Satanic Panic. You can also use the links in the description. However, I do not have an affiliate relationship with CSS Audio. So if you buy it, I'm not going to get anything. But if you buy anything from Amazon and stuff like that, I'll get something. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen through your new CSS Audio Criton 1 TDXs with or without the upgraded crossover. I don't think it's really going to matter. And fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.